The street was loud, crowded, and unforgiving, the kind of place where people's hearts hardened without them even noticing. Cars honked, vendors shouted, and hundreds of footsteps rushed past without a single pause. In the middle of all this noise sat a man almost invisible to the world. A homeless man with tired eyes, trembling hands, and a voice so soft it was nearly swallowed by the chaos around him. He held a small cardboard sign. Just one line, "Hungry. Please help." Most people didn't even look at him. Some turned their faces away. Others pretended to be busy on their phones. To them, he was just another shadow on the sidewalk, someone whose story didn't matter, someone easy to ignore. But then he walked by. Jonathan Roumie. Calm. Gentle. Humble. No cameras. No fans. No spotlight. Just a man walking through the city like everyone else. The homeless man noticed him approaching. His hands shook, not because of the cold, but because after being rejected so many times, even asking felt painful. But hunger makes you do things your pride can't stop. With all the courage he had left, he lifted his eyes and whispered, "Sir, can you give me some food?" He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for a job. He asked for the most basic thing a human being needs to survive: food. For a moment, Jonathan didn't say anything. He just looked at the man, not through him like everyone else had, but at him as if he truly saw him. And then something unbelievable happened. People nearby turned their heads. A couple paused mid-stride. A mother pulling her child across the sidewalk slowed down, wondering why Jonathan had stopped. The homeless man braced himself, expecting another rejection, another "sorry, I can't help," another cold look that cut deeper than hunger ever could. But Jonathan's response, his reaction, what he did next, it stunned everyone who saw it. It was something powerful, something human, something so unexpected, people nearby literally gasped. In a world where most walk away, Jonathan did the one thing nobody expected. And what happened in the next few moments left the entire street in complete disbelief, and changed one man's life forever. The city was alive in the way only big cities are, a mix of opportunity and despair, beauty and struggle, hope and heartbreak all sitting side by side. Tall glass buildings reflected the afternoon sun, casting long shadows over the people rushing below. Some were chasing dreams, some were running from problems, and some, simply trying to survive the day. Jonathan Roumie had just finished a quiet meeting at a small community center a few blocks away. Nothing fancy. No red carpets. No interviews. Just a discussion about charity work and ways to support people who had no one else to lean on. As he walked down the street, he carried the same calm presence he was known for, gentle steps, soft eyes, and a heart that always seemed to be listening. He didn't stand out, not to the average stranger, at least. He didn't move with a celebrity swagger, and he wasn't surrounded by flashing cameras. If anything, he blended in more than people expected him to. And maybe that was the secret to why this moment was about to become so unforgettable. A few meters ahead, on a patch of cold concrete beneath a flickering streetlight, sat a man whose life had been reduced to a sign, a worn-out backpack, and clothes that looked like they'd been through too many storms. His hair was messy, his beard untrimmed, and his eyes, tired, almost defeated. He watched crowds pass by him like a river that never stopped. Not one person paused. Not one person even acknowledged he existed. He was surrounded by hundreds of people, yet utterly alone. The homeless man clutched his cardboard sign tighter. Hungry. Please help. Hours had passed since his last meal. His stomach ached, but his dignity ached even more. Each time someone walked past pretending not to notice him, it chipped away another piece of whatever hope he had left. Then he saw Jonathan approaching. He didn't know who Jonathan was. Not an actor. Not a public figure. Not a familiar face. All he saw was another human being, someone who might listen, or might ignore him like everyone else. He hesitated. Should he ask? Should he speak? Should he risk being hurt again? His throat tightened from nerves. Rejection had become a routine, but it still stung every time. Still, hunger overcame fear. When Jonathan stepped near him, he gathered courage from somewhere deep within, looked up slowly, and spoke. "Sir, excuse me, can you give me some food?" Jonathan paused, Not because he was shocked, and not because he was inconvenienced, but because he heard something in the man's voice that most people missed. Humility. Desperation. A plea for basic survival. He didn't answer immediately. He simply observed him, truly saw him. Behind Jonathan, a mother hurried her children across the walkway. A businessman in a suit swerved around the two of them as if compassion were an obstacle on his path. A group of teenagers walked by, laughing loudly at something on a phone, barely noticing the man sitting on the ground. But Jonathan noticed. The homeless man began to pull back, assuming the silence meant rejection. "Sorry, forget I asked," he whispered, lowering his head. His voice was defeated, quiet, the sound of someone who had learned not to expect anything good. Jonathan finally spoke. "Hey, look at me." The man raised his eyes slowly. "What's your name?" Jonathan asked. Not, "What happened to you?" Not, "Why are you homeless?" Not, "Are you looking for trouble?" Just a question that meant, "I see you as a human being." The man blinked, confused. No one had asked his name in days, maybe weeks. "Michael," he said, almost unsure of his own voice. Jonathan nodded. "Michael. I'm Jonathan. And yes, I can help you with food." But even Jonathan didn't know yet that this moment was about to become much bigger than a meal. A car slowed down nearby, the driver staring curiously. A couple waiting for the traffic light watched from across the street. A cafe window filled with surprised faces as people realized something unusual was happening. A man who was invisible a moment ago was suddenly the center of attention, because someone had chosen to stop. And that single moment, that simple act of noticing, was about to change everything. Michael sat frozen on the cold concrete, staring up at Jonathan as if he couldn't fully believe someone had actually stopped. Someone had actually spoken to him. Someone had actually cared. Jonathan's gentle voice cut through the busy noise of the street. But not everyone appreciated what was happening. A group of teenagers stood a little distance away, leaning against a bus stop sign. They had been laughing loudly, scrolling through their phones, sharing jokes that only they found funny. When they saw Jonathan kneeling next to Michael, their laughter shifted into murmurs, then smirks, then outright mockery. "Bro, look at this," one of them snickered. "Is he seriously talking to that guy?" Another nudged his friend and whispered just loud enough for everyone around to hear. "Bet he's just pretending to be poor so people feel sorry for him. Happens all the time." Michael heard them. Every word. Every cruel remark landed like a punch to his chest. He lowered his head again, ashamed, not because he had done something wrong, but because humiliation was the one thing he couldn't escape no matter where he went. Jonathan, however, didn't look away. He kept his eyes on Michael, listening, absorbing, understanding. "Michael," Jonathan said softly, "when was the last time you ate?" Michael coughed awkwardly, embarrassed to answer. "Yesterday," he whispered. "Yesterday morning. I haven't had anything since then." He expected pity. He expected judgment. But Jonathan's face only showed concern. Deep, genuine concern. "All right," Jonathan nodded. "We're getting you food. Right now." Just then, one of the teenagers couldn't resist throwing another insult. "Dude, don't waste your time. Guys like him always come back to the streets. He probably wants money for something else." A couple walking past heard the comment and decided to join in, shaking their heads. "Honestly, helping them is useless," the man muttered. "Most of them choose this life," the woman added. Michael swallowed hard. His shoulders slumped even more. He shrank into himself, trying to disappear. Jonathan slowly stood up. At first, he didn't respond to the insults. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lecture. He simply turned to face the group of teenagers, calm, steady, unshaken. "You see a homeless man," Jonathan said quietly. "I see a human being who's hurting." The statement wasn't loud, yet it silenced everyone. One of the teenagers scoffed. "Yeah, whatever." Jonathan stepped closer, but his tone remained gentle. "You think it's funny? You think it makes you strong to mock someone who's already struggling?" He shook his head. "That's not strength. That's insecurity dressed as confidence." The teenagers didn't expect that. Their smirks faded. A small crowd began forming, nothing huge, but enough for a few curious eyes to linger. People sensed something meaningful unfolding, something deeper than a random street interaction. Jonathan turned back to Michael, not letting anyone's negativity change his focus. "Michael, you don't deserve to be treated like this." Michael blinked back tears. He didn't want to cry, not here, not in front of strangers, but the mixture of kindness from one man and cruelty from others made emotions flood through him. Then something happened that shifted the mood entirely. One of the teenagers, the tallest one, stepped forward and said, "Why are you doing all this anyway? He's just gonna ask again tomorrow. People like him don't change." Jonathan looked directly at the boy. "No one changes," Jonathan said softly, "until someone believes in them." The street grew silent again. The boy swallowed, turning his eyes away, unsure how to respond. Jonathan continued, "Every person you see on the street has a story you don't know. Pain you haven't felt. Battles you've never fought." He exhaled slowly. "Kindness doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Michael stared at Jonathan as if seeing light for the first time in a long darkness. Jonathan reached out his hand. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you something warm to eat." For the first time that day, Michael stood, not because he had strength, but because someone had offered him theirs. Michael rose slowly, his legs shaky not just from hunger but from the shock of realizing someone was finally standing with him instead of against him. The street felt different now, less cold, less cruel, because in the middle of all the noise, Jonathan had created a moment of quiet humanity. Jonathan placed a steady hand on Michael's shoulder, guiding him gently toward a nearby cafe. But as they began walking, something unexpected happened. People started to watch. A woman pushing a stroller paused and whispered to her friend, "Is that Jonathan Roumie?" Her friend squinted. "I think so." "What is he doing?" A taxi driver rolled down his window, thinking he recognized the familiar face. A barista inside the cafe leaned closer to the glass, confused. Jonathan wasn't paying attention to any of it. All his focus was on Michael, making sure he didn't stumble, making sure he felt safe, making sure he felt seen. But Michael was overwhelmed. He kept glancing around nervously, afraid everyone was judging him, afraid the crowd's eyes carried the same coldness he had known for years. "Jonathan," he whispered, "maybe we shouldn't go inside. People will stare. They don't like when someone like me walks in." Jonathan stopped and faced him directly. "Michael," he said softly, "if anyone has a problem with you being treated like a human being, that's their problem, not yours." Michael looked at him, eyes wide, not used to anyone defending him so fiercely. Jonathan continued, "You deserve to eat just like everyone else. You deserve to sit at a table. You deserve dignity." Michael's lips trembled. No one had ever said those words to him before. The door to the cafe opened with a soft chime as they stepped inside. Instantly, conversations lowered. A couple of employees exchanged uncertain glances. A man sitting with his laptop frowned as if the presence of someone homeless ruined his coffee. Michael felt the weight of 100 silent judgments. "I can wait outside," he murmured. He began to turn away. But Jonathan caught his arm gently. "You're not waiting outside," Jonathan said firmly. "You're not less than anyone here." He guided him to an empty table by the window. A waitress approached cautiously, unsure how to handle the situation. She asked, "Can I help you?" Jonathan smiled warmly at her. "Yes. My friend Michael here would like a warm meal. And I'll take whatever he's having." The word friend hit Michael harder than any rejection ever had. The waitress nodded slowly, still confused, but something in Jonathan's tone softened her hesitation. As they waited for the food, Michael looked around nervously. He could feel the eyes. He could feel the whispers. A man at a nearby table leaned to his wife and muttered, "He's going to ask for money next, just watch." His wife whispered back, "They shouldn't allow people like that inside." Michael lowered his head, the old shame returning. But Jonathan leaned closer and said quietly, "Ignore everything else. Right now, it's just you and me. All noise, all opinions, they don't matter." Michael swallowed hard. "I don't understand why you're doing this." Jonathan's voice remained soft, but firm with compassion. Because nobody deserves to be invisible, Michael. Then something changed in the room. The same teenagers who had mocked Michael earlier walked into the cafe. When they saw him sitting with Jonathan, eating, talking, and existing with dignity, they froze. One of them whispered, "Is that the same guy from outside?" Another shrugged awkwardly, suddenly less confident. Jonathan noticed them but didn't react aggressively. Instead, he offered a calm look, not of anger, but of challenge. A silent message. You can choose to be better. The teenagers shifted uncomfortably. Meanwhile, the waitress returned with plates of steaming hot food. Michael stared at the meal as if it were something sacred. He hadn't seen a fresh plate of food in months. His hands shook as he picked up the fork. "You okay?" Jonathan asked. Michael nodded, tears forming. I just forgot what it feels like, to be treated like I matter." Jonathan placed a hand over his heart. "You do matter. More than you know." Outside, people passing by stopped at the window, peering in. To them, it looked like something unusual, something pure, was happening inside the cafe. And they were right. Because at that small table, in a crowded city full of rushing strangers, a homeless man was finally tasting more than food. He was tasting dignity. He was tasting hope. And neither he nor Jonathan had any idea that this moment was about to lead to an even bigger revelation. Michael ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were the first warm meal of his life. Steam rose from the plate, but something warmer rose inside his chest, a feeling he hadn't tasted in years: dignity. Jonathan sat across from him, calm and steady, watching him the way someone watches a fragile miracle. Every few moments, he'd ask gently, "You doing okay?" And Michael would nod, unable to form many words because emotion filled every corner of his throat. But while this quiet moment unfolded, something began stirring outside. A dark SUV pulled up near the cafe curb, sleek, polished, with tinted windows. The kind of vehicle that only important people used. The engine shut off. 3 people stepped out, 2 men in suits and a woman holding a folder. They looked around urgently, scanning the street. Inside the cafe, the teenagers stopped whispering when they noticed the sudden shift of attention outside. A few customers pressed their faces closer to the window, trying to see who the VIPs were. The waitress paused mid-step, clutching her notepad tighter. Michael, lost in his meal, didn't notice any of it. Jonathan, however, he sensed it before anyone else did. He looked up from the table slowly, recognizing the unfamiliar faces approaching, faces he had been expecting at a meeting later that day. The cafe door swung open with a chime that sounded louder than before. The woman in the suit hurried in. "Mr. Roumie." "There you are," she said breathlessly. Every head in the cafe turned instantly. Wait," whispered a man near the counter. "Did she just say, Mr. Roumie?" Another customer gasped. "Is that actually Jonathan Roumie?" The Jonathan Roumie. The teenagers who had mocked Michael earlier froze, eyes wide, mouths half open. One of them whispered, "Bro, we messed up." But the executives weren't focused on them, only on Jonathan. "Sir," one of the men said respectfully, "we've been searching for you everywhere. The charity board meeting is waiting. The donors are waiting. Everyone's assembled." Michael paused, fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at Jonathan with confusion. You're someone important." Jonathan smiled humbly. "I'm just someone trying to do the right thing." But the executives continued, making the truth impossible to hide. "Sir," the woman added, "we need you to review the documents for the new homeless outreach program. It's launching today. Your initiative, your design, your approval." The entire cafe went silent again. Wait. Homeless outreach program? His initiative? People stared at Jonathan in disbelief. They had watched him kneel beside a homeless man, without knowing he personally oversaw programs meant to help thousands more like him. Michael blinked slowly, his mind trying to grasp everything. "You help people like me," he whispered. Jonathan nodded. "That's why I'm here. That's why I stopped." The teenagers looked at each other, shame flooding their faces. They realized the man they mocked, the man they had laughed at, was sitting with someone who dedicated his life to lifting people up. One teenager stepped forward awkwardly. "Sir, we didn't know," he muttered. Jonathan met his eyes with calm firmness. "You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect." The boy looked down, unable to argue. Michael's hands trembled as he placed the fork down. "Jonathan, you were supposed to be somewhere important. Why would you stop for me?" Jonathan leaned forward. "Michael, you are important." Those 4 words hit harder than any insult Michael had ever endured. The executive stood respectfully, waiting, but Jonathan didn't rush. He turned to the woman in the suit. "Give me 5 more minutes," he said. "I'm exactly where I need to be." The executives nodded without question. Michael stared at him, eyes shining. "No one has ever said something like that to me," he whispered. Jonathan smiled softly. "Then it's about time someone did." Outside, more people gathered near the cafe window, whispering, pointing, witnessing what felt like a scene out of a movie, a scene of raw, unfiltered humanity. Inside, a homeless man who once felt invisible now found himself treated with respect in front of an entire street. But the real surprise was still unfolding. Because Jonathan wasn't done helping him. Not even close. What would happen next would change Michael's life forever. The next morning arrived quietly, but something felt different, like the air itself was charged with purpose. Jonathan woke before sunrise, still thinking about the man named Joseph. He replayed their final words over and over again. "You restored my faith, not because you gave me something, but because you saw me." Those words had branded themselves onto Jonathan's heart. He sat by the window of his hotel room, watching streaks of soft gold break across the sky. He whispered a simple prayer under his breath, asking for clarity, for strength, and for a way to keep helping people like Joseph, not just once, but continuously. By the time he stood up, he knew his next steps wouldn't just be accidental or situational. They would be deliberate. Before heading out, he checked his phone. His social media had exploded overnight. A video someone recorded of his interaction with Joseph had gone viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments, people from around the world touched by what had happened. But instead of feeling proud, Jonathan felt responsible. If this many eyes were watching, he could use the moment for something greater than attention. He walked outside, still wearing the same simple jacket from the day before. He wasn't dressed like a celebrity. He wasn't behaving like one either. He was a man on a mission. The place where he had first met Joseph wasn't far, so he went there first. Maybe Joseph had returned. Maybe he wanted to talk again. Maybe he needed something. But when Jonathan arrived, the spot was empty. The sidewalk held only the usual morning bustle, people heading to work, vendors setting up their stands, cars honking in impatient rhythm. The world had moved on. But Jonathan hadn't. He stood there for several minutes before lowering his head and smiling softly. "Wherever you are, my friend, I hope you're at peace," he whispered. Just as he turned to leave, a familiar voice called out behind him. "You're looking for the homeless guy, aren't you?" Jonathan turned and saw the coffee shop owner, the same man who had given Joseph a cup of tea the day before. He wiped his hands on his apron as he approached. "He left early," the owner said. "Told me he was heading to a shelter a few miles away. Said he wanted to start fresh today. Didn't say more than that." Jonathan felt a wave of relief wash through him. The man was safe. He was trying. That was more than enough. "Thank you," Jonathan replied. The owner hesitated before adding, "Whatever you told him, it changed something in him. You should know that." Jonathan nodded silently. He didn't do it for praise. He never did. But hearing that Joseph's journey had taken a hopeful turn meant everything. Instead of going back to his hotel, Jonathan wandered through the city again. This time, he wasn't scanning for cameras, fans, or attention. He was searching for purpose. Everywhere he looked, he noticed people he normally might have overlooked: street cleaners pushing heavy carts, delivery workers rushing between jobs, an elderly man struggling to carry groceries, a young woman crying quietly at a bus stop. It struck him how many people walked past these scenes every day without stopping. How many silent cries went unheard simply because the world had become too noisy. Jonathan sat at a nearby bench, pulled out his phone, and opened his notes app. He began typing furiously, not lines for a script, but ideas. Real ideas. A foundation. A small organization. A project dedicated to providing meals, clothing, counseling, and, most importantly, human connection to those who felt invisible. He didn't have all the resources. He didn't have all the answers. But he had a story. He had a platform. And he had a fire inside him now that wouldn't burn out. After nearly an hour of writing, he stopped and reread everything. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was the beginning of something meaningful. Jonathan stood up, taking a deep breath. "Okay," he whispered to himself. "Let's start." And as he walked away, the morning sun finally rose high enough to bathe the whole street in warm, golden light, just as if the city itself was blessing his next steps. Jonathan spent the rest of the morning walking through the city with an unusual sense of clarity. Every face he saw, every hurried step, every exhausted expression, he took it all in. It wasn't just observation anymore, it was connection. He felt responsible for these people, even the ones he didn't know. The encounter with Joseph had awakened something he hadn't fully understood before. The world wasn't short of resources, it was short of compassion. By noon, Jonathan had made his way to a small public park. Families played on the grass, workers sat on benches eating quick lunches, and a group of volunteers were handing out sandwiches to a line of people experiencing homelessness. He paused, watching them. The volunteers were efficient, cheerful, and genuinely kind. He admired them, but something still felt incomplete. They were giving food, yes. They were helping, yes. But many people in that line didn't make eye contact. They shuffled quietly, received the sandwich, nodded politely, and moved on. Their bodies were being fed, but their spirits, maybe not. Jonathan approached the table slowly, unsure if he should interrupt. A woman wearing a volunteer badge noticed him and smiled warmly. "Hi. Want to help out?" she asked, offering him a stack of brown paper bags. Jonathan returned the smile just as warmly. "Sure," he replied, taking the bags without hesitation. He stood beside the volunteers and began handing out meals. At first, some of the people in line simply nodded and looked away, until one man recognized him. "Aren't you the guy from The Chosen?" the man asked, squinting as though trying to compare the real face to the one on screen. Jonathan smiled softly. "Yeah, but today, I'm just Jonathan." The man nodded slowly, then his eyes softened. "Good," he said. "Because we need more Jonathans out here, not more celebrities." Those words landed deep. Jonathan continued passing out bags, but he added something small each time, something simple yet powerful. He looked each person directly in the eyes and said, "Good to see you. You matter. Hope today is kind to you. Take care of yourself, okay?" A few people paused, seeming surprised that he'd spoken to them like that. Some smiled. Some didn't. But something shifted. The quiet heaviness floating around the line seemed to lighten just a bit. When the food was finished and the crowd dispersed, the volunteer organizer approached him. "You were different," she said thoughtfully. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "Most people come here with good intentions," she explained. "But you weren't just feeding them. You were talking to them, listening to them. You made them feel human." Jonathan exhaled softly. "Everyone deserves to feel seen." The organizer nodded, then hesitated before asking, "Would you be interested in partnering with us? Maybe speaking at an event? Sharing what you experienced yesterday with that homeless man? Joseph, right?" Jonathan paused. The idea was tempting, but something inside him tugged gently, telling him the moment wasn't about publicity. "Maybe later," he replied gently. "For now, I think I need to do something a little quieter." The organizer respected that. "If you ever need help, we're here." Jonathan thanked her and walked away, settling onto a nearby bench. He rubbed his hands together, feeling the weight of a new idea forming, something larger than a simple moment of kindness. His phone buzzed again. More notifications. Interviews. Requests. Headlines. The video of him with Joseph had reached over 10 million views. People were calling him an angel, a modern-day Good Samaritan, a real-life embodiment of compassion. But Jonathan didn't feel like any of those things. He felt humbled and determined. He opened his notes again, scrolling through the list he had made earlier. One section stood out. Phase 1, create a team. Jonathan realized that if he wanted to help consistently, if he truly wanted to make an impact, he couldn't do it alone. He needed people who cared, people who understood, people who were willing to step into the uncomfortable places. He stood up, gripping his phone. "All right," he said to himself. "Let's build this." As he began walking out of the park, he saw a young boy feeding breadcrumbs to pigeons. Laughing, carefree, joyful. Jonathan couldn't help but smile. That's what he wanted the world to look like, little pockets of kindness everywhere, spreading from one person to another. A ripple effect. And without knowing it fully yet, Jonathan had just taken his first step toward creating something that would change his life, and countless others.